without rage, brutal, without mercy. But you will be worse. Rip and tear until it is done.
In the first age, in the first battle, there were parries, color-coded mechanics that taught the player and the Slayer how to stand and fight. In this first age, where the war between the Sentinels and the forces of Hell raged endlessly like Twitter posts, you controlled the buttons that you pressed. In the realm of the Dark Ages, you stood and you fought against demons that go through a makeover every generation in the Doom franchise. The Slayer in the Dark Ages shakes the ground not unlike the Space Marines and has continued to rip and tear, but differently this time, in what may appear to be the most divisive and conflicting Doom game in the modern Doom entries thus far. Greetings everyone, I hope you're all doing well. The past week or so has been nothing but a long, drawn-out episode of anxiousness to finally unwrap the game and bring it out into the light. And ever since its announcement, I have been stoked for a new Doom entry. And ever since this channel has started, Doom has had a strong root in its creation. I have talked about Doom 1 to 3, 2016, Eternal, and now, the Dark Ages. Doom the Dark Ages is the third feather in the modern and marvelized universe that has now been born in the womb of Doom. Doom from a historical note has always been about the gameplay, but each installment has not only painted a new canvas, but has also been restructured as an experience separate from what came before. Doom 64 held the same gameplay and level design as 1 and 2, but felt slower. Rooms were darker and the music was more ambient, making it a more horror-centric and atmospheric experience, rather than the straight-to-the-point, action-focused predecessors. Doom 3 took the horror approach from 64 and made more literal changes to the visual presentation, changed the pace of the gameplay, and added more story and lore into Doom 3's narrative. Doom 2016 was the return-to-form experience that was craved by Doom fans, and not only resurrected the franchise, but also became the most influential game for what would eventually spawn the boomer shooter genre. Doom 2016, from the perspective of a run-and-gun shooting experience, was close to perfect. There is a reason why it is rated higher than the other two modern Doom entries, but I will get into that later. Doom Eternal was also a game that was close to a perfect FPS experience in my opinion, but the game was also a dice roll. While many of us embraced the new change, there were others in the Doom community that did not like the new change, feeling that 2016 was already the perfect formula for Doom. Nevertheless, id Software did as they had always done, trying something different while respecting the core identity of the franchise, and the identity of Doom has always been about one angry man killing demons. And now finally, we have Doom the Dark Ages, where once again, id Software has redefined the approach to Doom's gameplay, how one angry person has become the thing hell fears. 3 decades of ripping and tearing, 3 decades of joy and celebration, but also 3 decades of discourse, petty squabbles, and disagreements on what is Doom. And it seems that Doom the Dark Ages is becoming another chronicle in the story of Doom's ever-evolving formula that mixes and matches every release. I loved 2016 and Eternal. They, in the realm of single player, are the most polished and finely chiseled first-person experiences in our lifetime so far. Doom the Dark Ages is also an amazing game with a wealth of combat depth, artistic exploration of the medieval and the sci-fi, and is ambitious in its courage to give Doom a story, something that has historically been deemed not important in the series. But it is also the most divisive game out of the 3 due to how different it is. It is not 2016, it is not Doom Eternal, it is a different beast that is a mutation and reimagining of the first 2 Doom games, all the while being drastically different in terms of the core gameplay. Out of the 3, this is the one that I've been torn on the most. I have told others of my personal order, but as I continued to think about this game, I became even more unsure as time passed. When I first booted up the Dark Ages, the wondrous joy I experienced upon a new Doom game returned. But as I continued playing through Doom the Dark Ages, I noticed certain gripes, annoyances, and issues that also forced me to view both sides of the game, making me question which one I enjoyed the most. Doom the Dark Ages really is something, and my experience in the game has been well worth it. But is it better than Doom Eternal? Honestly, I'm not so sure yet. And it's not necessarily the game's fault either, since there were many factors that put the game in the most unenviable position a successor can have, and I will do my best to explain my feelings about the game overall. So, let's dive into the Dark Ages, shall we? When it comes to the story, it is everyone's favourite part of Doom. It is so fascinating and rich that most players frequently ignore it. Even John Carmack gave his 2 cents on the idea of story in FPS games. id Software wove the story of 2016 with a feeling of mysticism. The Slayer's past was cryptic and shrouded in mystery. The Testaments themselves told us some of his legends, but they made the story more ambiguous to the character's nature and what he really was. It had a show-and-tell approach that left enough room for the player to fill in the gaps. However, it was overshadowed by the polished and immensely satisfying, straight-to-the-point gameplay. Doom Eternal's narrative tries to balance the show-and-tell by adding more meat to the bone. More characters, dialogue, and exposition was thrown into the mix, and also an overwhelming amount of lore that could be read in your downtime that busted the metaverse of Doom wide open. Lore in general is the backbone of a story, adding lots of flavor and meat into the universe that makes you appreciate the story even more. But it is not its job to replace it. Doom Eternal's lore is only as interesting as your interest for the story itself, and if the hook doesn't land, then the lore is up hanging in the air. Some appreciate it, and if you are a lore fiend, there is plenty to unpack. But once again, the story in Eternal would be an afterthought compared to the gameplay. If the Slayer doesn't care, why should you? Doom Eternal from a story perspective is a mess with gaps that could fill an entire Doom game in of itself. But id Software wanted to show that Doom could have a story, and the Dark Ages is an evolution of that idea, or a de-evolution for some. Well, Doom the Dark Ages doubles down on the story and the lore taken from Doom Eternal, and takes us back to a much earlier period of the Slayer's existence, the First Age, the First Battle. The Dark Ages takes us to a place in time where the Slayer was forging his legend into reality, where the demons, over time, would learn to fear him, and the Sentinels of Argent Danua would come to know of the Slayer. In the beginning, the Slayer is quite literally a tool, a weapon controlled and manipulated by the Makers, the third wheel overseeing the war between Argent Danua and Hell, where King Novik, his daughter Commander Thera, and their people are fighting against the villain of the story, Prince Azrak, who seeks the heart of Argent, a powerful artifact that would guarantee his dominion over the realm of Argent Danua, thus dooming the kingdom to hellfire and brimstone for all of eternity. Nevertheless, the Makers deploy the Slayer to assist the Sentinels, but he is not completely willing in the act, for his anger is replaced by obedience due to the device stuck on him, called the Tether. Throughout the Slayer's young and violent journey across space and time, he rips and tears the demons many times over, in a techno-medieval setting where we have the ugly up-close combat of the medieval ages and the deadliness of the future, reflected in the guns the Slayer himself uses. Doom the Dark Ages has an amazing setting. While I loved the epic and beautiful vistas of Doom Eternal's levels, I missed the horror-like aesthetics and atmosphere of Doom 2016 that was shown in the environments and the designs of the demons themselves, where it felt less like a game and more like a dream that made you sweat. Doom the Dark Ages brings back the horror aesthetics, but with a reimagined look that also returns more of the medieval levels, and the hell levels from Doom Eternal that I loved. There is less life, the grass isn't as green, and everything here is falling apart. Places like Habeth looks more like in its prime than what we saw in Doom Eternal. The world of the Sentinels feel large and epic, as do the levels themselves, but it also shows a display of tragedy, for we know that everything later went to shit, as we saw in Doom Eternal. Now, while the setting of Doom the Dark Ages is fantastic, and I'd say is my personal favourite out of the three, when it comes to the story, it's overall very mixed. The story in itself was ultimately inconclusive and it doesn't really go anywhere. However, there were some great moments in the cinematics, some surprise moments, and absolutely badass moments that enhances the rest of the game. id Software's attempt to make a cinematic approach is commendable, but the root is weak because of Doom's relationship with story. From the very beginning, Doom's story has been sidelined because it was never designed with it in mind during its early years. id Software are dealing with a history of negligence, and it's going to take a lot, and I mean a lot of work, to prove that the story can shine just as much as the gameplay itself. But time and again, they have always done an excellent job with the setting. The Dark Ages out of the three has the best setting in my opinion. It returns the horror atmosphere of 2016, the epic scale of Eternal, and blends it together in a techno-medieval setting that I have wanted more of ever since Eternal teased some of it. Doom the Dark Ages is the most ambitious of the bunch in terms of the story, but again, the end of it is inconclusive, raises more questions than answers, and needs another game to pick up the pieces. And now, the most polarizing part of the game that will make or break the deal for you, and that is the gameplay. Gameplay is the first and foremost reason that anyone picks up a Doom game. Doom historically has promised and delivered a solid and satisfying experience of killing demons with a variety of awesome and destructive weapons. They are so well polished that even the worst Doom game is preferable to the amount of crap that can often be found in the shooter scene. Doom 2016 had the run and gun, pick whatever weapon you want approach experience. Doom Eternal had the vertical, fast-paced and technical combat loop that actively challenged players to utilize everything in their arsenal, and rewarded players that approached Doom Eternal's gameplay with a more holistic mindset. Eternal's existence, though, would divide the modern fanbase, because not everyone embraced the changes Eternal would bring. And the reason why is quite simple, because 2016 was either the perfect shooter or close to perfect in their eyes. Doom 2016 is the most accessible game out of the three by virtue of its simple nature. It doesn't ask very much of you when you think about it. In fact, the game is the most casual of the three. You have your guns and you have your demons. You could use anything you wanted and make tangible progress through the levels, regardless of whether you were trying to or not. The cravings for the simple pick up and play gameplay of Doom 1 and 2 was nourished. Right here. Doom 2016 was, for these people, perfect. It was so perfect that it would be inconceivable for id Software to change that. The expectation for 2016 was so deeply rooted because of the quality assurance and the technical wizardry behind the team's efforts for 2016. Doom Eternal and the Dark Ages share the same visions of challenging the player to new ideas, but by their mere existence, they also share the same burden of alienation and disappointment in the eyes of 2016 players that wanted more of 2016. Eternal and the Dark Ages brought change to the Doom formula, and it has been largely successful. Many loved Eternal, myself included, and it is in my top 10 games of all time. The Dark Ages, though, is still fresh and still needs time to stand its ground and fight. It is also a game that needs to be looked at from all sides too, as the game continues to develop from the community's perspective. The wheel of time once again turns. Some 2016 players rejected Eternal, and now some Eternal players are rejecting the Dark Ages. In fact, some have thought that this game isn't Doom at all. Now, you can stretch the definition of Doom as much as you want, but I will spare you further mental exhaustion and needless brain cells dying and just tell you what Doom is in its simplest form. It is a game about killing demons. You're welcome. Now, moving on from stupid arguments, let's move on to more important things like the actual gameplay of Doom the Dark Ages. Forget about 2016, forget about Doom Eternal here. If you're expecting either, you will be immeasurably disappointed because it does not play like either of them at all. The main commonality with the Dark Ages and Doom Eternal is the exploration of the combat depth. The Dark Ages goes for something rooted in the classic Doom games, where it combines the horizontal flow of combat with boots on the ground, widening the arenas and the maps with an exploratory approach, while adding new layers of mechanics that creates what I would say the most unique synergy of combat that the series has ever seen. In Doom Eternal, you had a flurry of weapon combos, combined with blood punches and equipment usages that maximized your damage output and took advantage of enemy weak points and magnetized the faltering system that could be abused like cigarette stores evading tax. Doom the Dark Ages, though, creates a harmony of defense and offense with a trinity of combat that moves together beautifully once you allow it to breathe. and respect the fact that it's trying to teach you some new tricks. You have the melee weapons, the shield saw, and the guns all in sync. The guns are the Slayer's sword. And speaking of swords, where are they, Hugo? Fist, flail, and mace? But no sword? Very disappointing. This does not honor the Sixth House and the tribe unmourned, and sword and sorcery is rolling in its grave right now. I hope that this is immediately addressed in the DLC. Now, moving on. The core gameplay loop has the same idea of challenging the player, but the transition isn't as scary as you might think. For starters, the controls are quite simple, and are still customizable for those that want more options. Personally, I had no issues at all adjusting, because the mentality that I developed from Doom Eternal carried over to the Dark Ages, where I naturally adjusted to the new mechanics, and the game gives you not only plenty of opportunities to practice, but an entirely new difficulty system that I think is the most amazing thing that this game has to offer. The difficulty slider, which I will get into later. Doom 2016 had you shoot whatever guns you wanted. Doom Eternal gave you trials and challenges to overcome through its deeper mechanics in the combat loop. Doom the Dark Ages, however, requires you to synergize the use of the shield, parrying incoming attacks, blocking attacks, firing your weapons, and striking your opponents with melee damage on top of using your guns. 3 types of weaponry are being used at the same time: the melee, the shield, and the ranged weapons, i.e. your guns. The weapon with the most impact, though, is the shield itself. It defends you from attacks that can be blocked or parried, and is intrinsically linked with the core gameplay of the Dark Ages. You have no choice but to deal with the shield. You cannot exist in this game without it, because the enemies are also programmed with this shield in mind. Enemies close the distance very easily, forcing you to always fight up close, and the range of the weapons also supports this reality in the gameplay. Each gun has you fighting most of the time up close, since that is where you will deal the most damage. Personally, I love this new synergy of combat, and in time, I might even come to like its system more than Eternal. The weapons are absolutely amazing in their design and their usage. The medieval aesthetics behind their designs are the kind of thing I would expect to see in a metal album, and I still think to this day that the Skull Crusher weapon, known as the Pulverizer, or the Ravager in this game, is the coolest weapon design in the history of Doom. All of the weapons don't feel out of place, nor do they feel useless. They each feel unique and serve different functions vital to your success in battle. Some of my personal favorites so far have been the Impaler, the Super Shotgun, Combat Shotgun, Pulverizer, and the Chain Shot. In terms of the melee weapons, I am still crying in my sleep about the lack of a sword, but am comforted by the joy of flailing enemies, crushing their skulls with the mace, or beating them up with my fists. And the shield itself is a ton of fun to use, and has plenty of utility you should not ignore. You can parry, throw, spike an enemy with it, ricochet, wipe clusters of fodder with it, and shield bashing. By the 9, this thing is so much better than meat hooking in Eternal. Not only does it provide near instant travel from point A to B, but it can also stun and kill nearby fodder at the same time, adding to the surprising speed of this game. Also, there are no mods for the weapons. Instead, you have upgrades for the weapons that give you certain benefits when capitalized on. For example, the game's rocket launcher has an upgrade where a successful parry can give you heals upon close-up shots with the rockets after a parry. This makes dealing with certain monsters like Cosmic Barons, the new Hunter enemies, and Cyber Demons easier to deal with. Another example is the Impaler, where shield throwing a fodder and getting ammo for it powers up the next shot. This makes it great for headshots against more powerful enemies when you want to delete them faster. Things like this adds more options to the combat loop and creates new pathways for existing strategies that can be utilized in battle. This system also carries over to your melee weapons, where they have different benefits, and the shield, where different runes makes for unique effects with the shield. My personal favorite so far is the auto turret rune, that can activate during a successful parry and deal extra damage on enemies. On top of the gameplay is also the exploration. The fields here are much bigger than before. More enemies are being fought now, and with that comes some changes. For starters, you'll notice that you don't really have glory kills anymore like you used to, but executions. And while there are technically some glory kills, they are much more minimal and quicker compared to what you saw in 2016 in Eternal. This was done to balance out the scale of the arenas, because as it was explained during the development of the game, transitioning to glory kill animations in a larger scale battle would disrupt the new flow of combat, since you are fighting a lot more demons than you did in 2016 in Eternal. The glory kills worked in 2016 in Eternal because the arenas were more dense and the enemies were fewer. Removing this does take away the cool animations, but the new approach to executing enemies does make the combat more seamless, and I'm personally fine with that. As for the exploration, I'm glad that it does try to return to the more exploratory level design of Doom 1 and 2, but it does get tiring repeating the larger open-ended levels like you see in The Siege Part 1, and I can imagine that the fatigue would only be made worse during an Ultra Nightmare or Pandemonium run. The only real reason to explore is for 1, to get 100% completion in the levels, and 2, to have enough gold to upgrade all of your weapons for the masteries, all of your melee weapons, and also the shield runes and the base shield upgrades. Now, contrary to what this game may show you, Doom the Dark Ages is fast. Like stupidly fast. Even at normal speed, the combination of shield bashing and sprinting just shows how much faster the Slayer is in this game compared to Doom Eternal and 2016, coupled with the large-scale chaos of the larger arenas and the synergy of combat. Overall, I think it gives Eternal a run for its money speed-wise. But the experience made me wonder if there was more that they could have done with the synergy between the guns and the melee during combat. What about the choice of having a shield, for instance? What if you wanted to be more like Conan the Barbarian, with a giant weapon? What if you didn't want a shield, and had the option to switch between weapons and swing for devastating attacks while having more speed? Perhaps the Slayer decides one gun isn't enough, and 2 guns may be needed. Having different playstyles for the Slayer, while keeping melee and gun synergy in mind, would have been really interesting to see, and perhaps it might have been something considered during the concept ideas for the next Doom game. But instead, we have a game dedicated to the fusion of shield, melee, and guns working together. Like I've already said, you really can't exist without the shield in this game, and if you don't like it, then that's too bad, because there's not really any other way around it. Luckily though, I have come to enjoy the shield and gun combat quite a lot. Each enemy has a variety of different attacks, but are telegraphed to the point where it's easy to read. Parrying successfully slows things down for a brief moment, giving you an opportunity to anticipate the next attack, or bash for further faltering to then deliver more damage. Just using the guns isn't enough though, because while they are your damage dealers, you also need to utilize your shield and melee weapons to supply yourself with ammo, health, and armor that can either be chipped away slowly or annihilated in seconds on higher difficulties. In general, the parrying window is pretty forgiving. You can hold your shield for a bit and still successfully parry the attack, but you can also change the slider for parry windows to be shorter, making it more challenging, which now leads to what is, in my opinion, the game's greatest gift to Doom, the difficulty slider. This is my favorite part of the game, and the reason is because of what it means for Doom, and how it evolves the accessibility for Doom. The difficulty slider has a variety of options ranging from enemy player damage, projectile speed, parry windows, game speed, resource values, day's duration, you name it. They are all adjustable and can be changed in settings while in a level. No longer are you stuck with the preset difficulties like before. If there is something you don't like about the Nightmare difficulty, you can now change it and make it either easier or harder. The existence of the difficulty modifier creates infinite pathways for challenge and difficulty, as well as accessibility for new players, because the difficulty is now defined by the player, rather than by the game itself. You ultimately curate the challenge that you want, rather than have the game do it for you with presets that you couldn't change before. This, in effect, makes Doom the Dark Ages the most accessible game out of the 3, by virtue of difficulty selection. This also makes it the most complex game to pinpoint in terms of the difficulty and balancing, because people can now create their own definitions of Nightmare difficulty, or their own definitions of what is a balanced experience in Doom the Dark Ages. Some may be content with the choices pre-selected, others may decide that the resource values and parry windows need to be shorter, so naturally, these adjustments will be made for the experience desired by the player. I did my first playthrough on Nightmare without touching anything in the sliders, and it was quite challenging even then. I died a few times throughout most of the levels, due to a combination of getting a feel for the game, on top of rushing in without thinking about what I was doing. But overall, I never once reached a moment of frustration, not to the same point like I did in Tag 1 or some parts of Doom Eternal's base game. Of course though, the experience will vary depending on the person. If you're really struggling, there are ways to make the game even easier, and from that point on, It becomes a matter of practice if you desire to get better. On top of the 4 traditional difficulties, you also have Ultra Nightmare, your Permadeath difficulty, and Pandemonium, which is extra life mode, but with the caveat of making you start an entire level again if you lose a life. People that have experienced lasso runs in Halo will know this feeling very well. But with Ultra Nightmare and Pandemonium, you can adjust the slider still, which is absolutely fantastic because players can now work towards the goals of completing those challenges in a way that they can actually manage. The difficulty slider provides the most customization of difficulty in any of the main Doom entries and opens the gates for all types of players. In fact, I think more games should use this type of system. Just look at Amnesia the Bunker, for instance. A short game given so much more life because of what you can do with the modifiers. You can make it easier or far more scarier, where the monster is much more aggressive and the resources are lower. All this means is that the argument of difficulty can only be applied to the difficulty of adjustment, rather than the challenge that the Dark Ages gives. The game might just not be your cup of tea, and that is fine. Just don't say that the game is impossible when you already have an immediate and flexible system that can be changed at any time to make things easier. Now, the campaign itself comes down to 22 levels. Across different parts of the techno-medieval setting. There is no multiplayer or horde mode to speak of, although a horde mode would be awesome. There are 2 new gameplay loops on top of the main one, and that is in the guise of the mech and dragon sections of the game. Doom Eternal glimpsed the idea of piloting a mech, and the idea never got realized until this game, but the reception for it has been very mixed so far. Most of the people seem to not care that much for it, and even less so for the dragon gameplay. The mech has you punching titans and nothing else really, and for a moment you get to use a large gun. Dodging attacks is really easy, and unless you're trying to, you won't really ever die in these levels. It's fun and exciting at first, but wears off very quickly once you realize it never evolves beyond the first time that you use the mech and the dragon. The dragon sections, well, I didn't care for them at all. Out of the 2, I preferred the mech due to the popcorn fun of mech and kaiju battles, or monster on monster battles like in Godzilla, but both are ultimately shallow and are more of a visual spectacle that you cannot escape, which will also make Ultra Nightmare or Pandemonium runs an absolute slog to get through, which does make the campaign experience a lot more mixed compared to 2016 and Eternal, which I felt were more consistent level to level. Although the gameplay for me may actually be the most dynamic and interesting of the 3 due to the amazing synergy of shield, melee, and gun combat, coupled by the flexible difficulty sliders that can make the game easy as pie or masochistic. The weapons are incredible to use. Movement is stiff but powerful. Every stomp on the ground makes you feel like a walking tank molded by anger, which reminded me of Warhammer 40k bolt gun, where each step felt absolutely powerful. While it's less vertical than Doom Eternal, the movement is just as fast, if not even faster in other aspects, and the combat depth is only just getting started, and there's already so much of it. Now, before this game was released, I was chatting to people on the Doom Discord, where concerns about performance were raised. And even I was genuinely getting worried about whether my game could run it or not. But 2 things completely shocked me. 1, the game was only 67 gigabytes of install, in an age where you're expected to install over 100 gigabytes of data just to play a game. This made my storage immeasurably relieved, and it was surprising that not only does the game look better than its predecessors, but it has less space overall. The second thing was the performance itself. I was running this game on an i5-10400 with an RTX 3070, had everything on low with 144 refresh and 60 FPS. But not only did it run very well, but it still looked absolutely amazing. You will though need a card with ray tracing enabled since it is baked into the visuals. You can however run this game with a 20 series card minimum. In Midnight's video where he reviewed Doom the Dark Ages, he confirms that he ran the game on an RTX 2080 Super and a 9th generation Intel i9, and not only did the game run well for him, but it still looked good even on low settings. I am someone that doesn't give a shit about graphical fidelity nowadays because we are at a point where games look really good even on low settings. And when it comes to performance, I would rather have consistent FPS and shit graphics than the other way around. During my playthrough, I didn't have a single issue at all. No crashes, nothing. And since the game was running fine, I had no reason to change anything in the settings. Speaking of the visuals though, man, this game is eye candy. From both the graphics, the art direction, and the environmental work, the demon redesigns are really neat and are really cool. They fit the darker and more medieval aesthetic more, which enhances the atmosphere of the game. But there are times where it's difficult to appreciate the design because of the amount of particles thrown on screen on top of the speed of combat. And while the designs are, like I said, neat, I'm not a fan of some designs, like for instance the Cacodemon. I miss my red meatball of death, and there could have been other ways to illustrate the Cacodemon in this game's setting. Now, on its own merit, it is cool, but it feels far too detached from the iconic design of the creature. The rest of the demon designs I'm slowly opening up to, but overall, I'm really digging the mix of medieval and horror, which is what I wanted in 2016, and in Doom Eternal, I wasn't as into it. You have a bunch of other options in terms of the HUD and the colors, and you can also change the color of the parry indicators, which is awesome. Also, this is the coolest the Doomslayer has ever looked. His face model is much more human-like, the fur cape gives the armor additional drip, and the updated texture work just makes the game's art direction pop even more. Now, while the game is less saturated in colors than, say, in Eternal, the greyness is more fitting given the war-torn and hell-like atmosphere that the Dark Ages goes for in the medieval pseudo-sci-fi set piece. I can't speak for everyone in terms of visual preferences or the matter of performance, but so far the game ran beautifully on my rig that hasn't been upgraded in years, and visual spectacles made this for a wonderful canvas to gawk at. On the merit of sound, the combination of footsteps, shield bashes, the crunch of attacks, and the explosive pop from your weapons makes for a symphony of chaos and destruction, in a way that feels and sounds good at the same time, but I would highly recommend adjusting the master volume while turning the music up, because having both at high volume makes the sound very muddy, and your ears are more likely to bleed at that stage, and not in a good way either. So, turn the overall volume down to at least, say, 70% or 50 minimum, and the music up to 100. That way you get a more balanced mix of sound. Now, it's time to talk about the music. So far, this has been one of the most contested points about the game, the soundtrack for Doom: The Dark Ages. Part of what made Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal special was the unique soundtrack composed by Mick Gordon. The attention to detail and the time signatures to avoid disrupting the combat, modifying tools into instruments to produce unique electronic sounds, fused with the gent genre of metal, redefined the music of Doom. So much so that it became an inseparable part of the modern Doom era. I still think to this day that The Only Thing They Fear Is You is the best Doom track ever made. The songs he composed for Doom were so good that even people that don't like metal were into them. That level of power in a song is very, very, very rare. The experimental and unique vision that Mick Gordon had for 2016 and Eternal made such an impact that it even impacted compositions for other boomer shooters, and has spawned a genre of its own called Argent Metal. This is what Finishing Move, the studio behind the Dark Ages soundtrack, were up against. The legacy of Mick Gordon's music, tracks that made people fall in love with 2016 and Eternal even more than they already did. Finishing Move have done compositions for other games before, but this may have been the hardest one to do. People have already expressed comments about the Dark Ages not feeling like Doom without Mick Gordon's music. Not only did the studio have to deal with the attachment to music where the influence is so strong, but they also had to find a way to make the soundtrack unique to the rest. Now, despite the difficulties that they undoubtedly faced during the development of the game's music, they did the best they could, and so far, each track has sounded really good while in game, and really comes to life once you turn the master volume down and turn the music up. I am still processing my feelings about the soundtrack overall, and will talk about it more in a separate video, but I will say congratulations to Finishing Move. You have been given an immeasurably difficult task, and have still managed to give the Dark Ages a soundtrack for people to rip and tear with. Doom the Dark Ages is the Doom game I have been the most torn on. I certainly like it a lot more than 2016, but when compared to Eternal, I honestly don't know yet. Doom Eternal is a game that became very special to me, in the same way as games like Ultra Kill, Dusk, the Bungie era of Halo games, Doom 3, you name it. I've had an amazing time overall with the Dark Ages, but I've also been mixed on some things too. The constant slowdowns during parries becoming increasingly disruptive, where there should have been an option to turn it off, shallow mech and dragon sections that you can't skip, a story that's incomplete and inconclusive and is still somewhat negligible despite the great cinematics and the efforts made to create more dialogue and more character development, and some levels dragging on for a lot longer than you want them to. Other concerns I've raised or have talked about is a mix of preference and wishful thinking, but the pros here are so high that it ultimately doesn't detract from my personal enjoyment of Doom the Dark Ages, and has the potential to be even better than Doom Eternal upon future visits. What makes Doom the Dark Ages the most decisive Doom game is primarily how different it feels from the other two. Now, while you could play Doom Eternal like 2016, it was sort of like going against the grain. The Dark Ages, on the other hand, is a completely separate entity that doesn't feel like Doom Eternal or 2016, which means it is contending with both camps, where there is already a divide between the two. Doom the Dark Ages adheres to neither camp. It is an exploration of the game's roots, and also a reimagining of it. Whether you like the Dark Ages or not comes down to preference and what kind of Doom experience you prefer. But what is undeniable is the rarity of id Software's ability to not only deliver well-polished games, but games that are separate from each other mechanically, where they feel different to each other. Each Doom game offers something unique and generally delivers on a polished experience, which is something not a lot of other franchises have. Doom the Dark Ages takes some brave new steps in the story direction, but id Software needs a lot more work to do in this department. However, as long as they continue their exploration of new frontiers, they will also evolve Doom, where it may one day not just be great in gameplay, but in everything that constitutes a game. So overall, Doom the Dark Ages may be for me the most decisive Doom game, but it is also the bravest of the bunch, and is a fantastic game overall. Stay safe everyone, and thanks for watching.